Welcome back to this episode of Faith-Infused Leadership. I am your co-host, Meredith Banka, here with our host, Debbie Heiser, and she's brought an incredible guest with us today. Who do you have visiting with us today, Debbie?
Yeah, thanks, Meredith. We have Ross Longinhi, who is a friend, a mentor, and a colleague of mine. We have shared some work back and forth in the nonprofit sector or thrown work each other's way at times, and also worked on some projects together. And he's got a really vast background in leadership. So I'm really excited to talk with him today. And so Ross, I'm going to turn it over to you and let you just share with us a little bit about your past leadership experience and what you're doing as a leader today.
Well, thanks, Deb. If I look at my background in leadership, it's kind of scary to think about how long I've been in leadership roles. Probably over 35 years now, I think, formally in leadership roles, but there was even a few years before that when I was doing leadership work as, frankly, like a substitute teacher in my high school when one of our teachers got sick. So, I was leading classrooms at the age of 16 or 17 and other youth groups at that point in my life. So I've been around the leadership sphere for a long time, both in the nonprofit sector, most of it in the for-profit sector. I've led companies from as small as just a handful of employees to companies as large as about 1,500 employees. And so and as I mentioned, there's been a lot of different avenues to that, both in the for-profit and not-for-profit sector.
That's fantastic. And so in your experience as a leader, number one, thank you for being here with us today. Debbie's brought on some great guests to this show, and I think it's always awesome for our listeners to be able to get perspectives beyond those that we share. So when it comes to leadership and your 35 years of experience, what are the things that really speak to you when you think of the impact that you've had as a leader?
Yeah, I think if I look at what people have told me as a leader, it's that I really focused a lot on vision and strategy and where's the business or the organization going? What are they trying to get done? Why do they really exist? So a very missional focus, if you will. And again, it doesn't matter if you're making widgets or, if you're helping homeless, no matter what, we all have to know exactly what are we trying to get to when we grow up. So that's one thing I think that I've, really learned over the years. And the other thing is that, every person has gifts, has talents, and we have to find out what they are. And it's an interesting area. It's just from a human nature standpoint, as a lot of people don't really understand themselves what their talents are. And as leaders, that's one of the reasons we're here, is to help find those and to help define them, to develop them, and to make sure they're in alignment with what we need to get done.
So when you're talking first, because you brought up two really great points there, so I don't want to lose either one of them. So let's talk about the vision point first. So when you think about that, I mean, I've had experiences in leadership and in organizations, both for-profit and nonprofit, where the vision just, it's not a part of our daily conversation. So how do you keep vision in front of the group that you're working with, and why is that important?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. And I've seen a huge transition in my leadership over the years. I was one of those, frankly, that went to the mission and vision workshops that, every company did every few years. And I went very begrudgingly. I thought, this is just a waste of time. Why are we spending like a day or 2 or 3 days offsite typically, right? And back in the day, just to show my age, back in the day, you came away with a 3-ring binder, 3 inches thick that had all of this stuff in it. And that binder went on your shelf. And part of what was in that was your mission, your vision, and your strategies for the next 5 years. And you never looked at it again until you revisited it 2 or 3 or 4 years later. So how does that change? And I think what's changed for me is really diving into this whole work on vision and mission and looking at how can they help an organization? How can they help align an organization? And I started to do a lot of research in this area and started to study some people that were really good at it. And a person I think that probably wasn't in many ways a very good manager and a very good people person, but was incredible with vision, was Steve Jobs, at Apple. I mean, and there's a lot of books out there that says this guy did lead very well, and he was kind of a bear to work with. But man, he got some of the best and brightest people and talented people to work for him. Why? Because he could cast a vision like nobody else. And so that things like that started to make me to think thinking, what can we do to be better at vision? And so how I define vision is simply this. I define it as how could you describe, using visual words, how can you describe a future ideal state, not bound by time or money? So if you had a number of people in your organization and you had them all together and you had them brainstorming, what is a future ideal state? And take our blinders off. This is a very creative exercise. It's not the typical, well, you can't do this because of that, right? So using typical brainstorming modalities, you look at what would be that future state, and you let people dream. And in that dream, you start to develop a picture. And as you can imagine, that picture isn't a sentence of 10 words or less. It's not. It's a story. Mm-hmm. It's a short story. And it's a short story that's compelling, and it's exciting, and it gets people to start thinking about what could be. And when you have that developed, I think in an organization, now all of a sudden you can use that every day. You post it on next to your desk and you say, is my work today, is the most important work I'm doing today helping get to that vision? Mm-hmm. And that's how, and I think it takes time. This doesn't happen overnight. Developing a vision doesn't happen overnight. Inculcating that vision into the organization doesn't happen overnight, but I have seen it work where all of a sudden people will say, if somebody seems to be going off on a bit of a tangent, maybe somebody could say, well, let's pull up the vision. Let's just do it. It's a read. It takes 3 minutes, 2 minutes to read it. Read it. Is this helping us get to that future ideal state? I think that's one way to make it part of the fabric of an organization.
Oh, sorry, Debbie, go ahead.
Yeah, no worries, Meredith. So Ross, I have kind of a tactical question in there, because for our listeners that are maybe thinking, oh, I'd like to do this with my group, how do you get people to dream when they're not usually in that state?
Yeah, that's a great question. Sometimes beer and pizza helps. I do think you have to take people out of their setting, and this might sound cliche, but you do need to get them out of their office. You need to get them out of the normal surroundings that they're in at that point. You need to maybe get them outside for a bit. You need to get them, at times there's some game playing that you can do around creativity that, frankly, you can look online and find all kinds of things, but you really have to allow that, almost that inner child to come out. The studies that have been done on creativity of a 4-year-old or something like 100 times a 40-year-old. So how do you deal with the fact that when we become less creative as our life experiences tell us all the things we can't do? And so part of it is just setting that up into a very non-confrontational, non-judgmental atmosphere where we're able to be a little bit crazy.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Yeah, and it's a great question, Debbie, because I think people aren't accustomed to being asked to be creative that way, right? So we need to help them along the way. And I was going to ask, what do you do when you have those, maybe you're that manager, or you're that person that feels that we need to bring the vision back, but maybe there's people in your peer group or even upper management that doesn't recognize the importance of that. Any guidance around how to kind of get some consensus around vision as an important, compelling part of leadership?
Yeah, I mean, that's always a challenging question, right? It's always a challenging question when the vision isn't unified throughout the organization. But I also think it's a serious problem, a very, very serious problem if your vision isn't unified. And a couple of things, I'll answer your question here in a second, but a couple of things that I witnessed as well is a lot of organizations actually don't have a vision they might not even have a vision. And if they have a vision, it's really not a vision. It might be a sentence or sometimes even less than a sentence, and it doesn't really say much about anything. So I think to look at your organizations and say, do you have a vision? Number one. Number two is, do you have a vision that everybody has bought into and knows and uses and makes part of their daily routine? I think as a leader of an organization, to go around and just ask the questions to people in the organization, what do you think our vision is? Like, do you have it? What is it? Because a lot of organizations won't have it, or if they have it, You could say, is it compelling? Is it directional? Does it tell you where to head? You know, it doesn't tell you how. It shouldn't be very much about how to get there, right? So that's more strategies. It's really, where are we going? What does it look like? You know, and if people in the organization can't do that, I guess I would call a timeout with the organization's leadership and say, you know what? I went around and asked 10 people and they all gave me a different story as to what the vision is. I think we have a problem, you know, because we're clearly not able to all get to the same point if we all have different destinations we're trying to arrive at.
And I heard you when we first started this also say that one of the compelling points of leadership for you is strength finding, helping people recognize what their strengths are. And I wonder where you feel like this maybe lack of vision or lack of transparency of vision and then the strengths of the team intersect.
That's a great question. A lot of times we don't actually have people in our organizations that are very good at doing the vision work. You know, I find it more, frankly, in the nonprofit world that they're just doing something and they have a bunch of activities that they do, but they don't really have the people there to help them with vision and help them find the vision and solidify that vision. And so I think sometimes it's really important to get, you know, just to get help or at least just talk to somebody that's done some work in this area. So when it comes to strength finding, it's like, I think it's really important to make sure that you have the type of people in the organization. A lot of the smaller organizations just don't. And I wouldn't recommend that they do, frankly, to have that kind of talent within the organization. It's not talent that once you've gone through it, you need to recreate all the time. That visioning, for instance, the visioning process or the strategic processes. Yes, you have to continue living out the vision, executing upon the strategies, but you might not have the talent to get you to a compelling unified vision. And so that's where I think sometimes help from the outside is important.
So Ross, that brings up a question that I have in regards to, you know, sometimes hiring out is the way to go. You know, I know you do a lot of that work, but then there's times that within our companies, we have to take stock of, or in our organizations, take stock of the talent that we have in the organization. And sometimes those map up, sometimes they don't. So how do you deal with that? Or what are some of the experiences you've had with that?
Yeah, it's always a challenge, right, to understand what strengths you need in the organization, and that's not a static question either, right? So I mean, the needs of the organization change with time, and we have to be, as leadership, we have to be aware of that, and we can't fight it. I mean, it's the reality of the world we live in. It changes very quickly, and where we have to go at times changes, where our emphases need to lie may change. And so do we have those, are we constantly monitoring those strengths? Are we, you know, so I mean, what's wonderful, it was one of the strengths is flexibility and adaptability, right? And so sometimes you have people that are inherently good at observing the differing needs of the organization. We need to tap into those people. The reality is in many, many organizations, particularly smaller organizations, we don't have all of the skills that and the strengths that we need in the organization. And so one of the tactics I like to encourage people to do is not only do a number of the different things out there to identify your personal strengths, but identify what are the requirements of the job I'm in, which ones of my strengths I may be able to develop in order to better fulfill those needs. But most importantly is what strengths don't I have and I probably will never be good at. And now comes the hard part. Who could help me? Like, who could fulfill those needs? And I think that last question, that last part of that is really difficult for a lot of organizations and individuals to go through, because they have a hard time saying, well, you know what, I'm never going to be good at whatever I need to be good at. And I need to go find somebody. There's a lot of people out there that are, especially in today's economy, where you have all of these people that aren't working the traditional job. I mean, there's probably 3 of us on this call right now. And that, you know, that have incredible talent. If you just, I mean, another thing that's along those lines is the number of people, what is it? Something like 30% of the US population has over 30 years of experience in the workforce.
Wow.
That's incredible.
So what do we, think of the talent that is out there.
But what is it that makes us feel like we have to be good at everything? I mean, as I'm hearing you talk, and we get into these leadership positions, and we have this feeling that now I'm a leader, now I have to be good at all of it. And
Yeah,
where does that come from? I mean, if we could just drop that, it'd be a different conversation altogether.
it would be. I mean, there's a lot of history there about the American style of leadership and being super people, supermen and women, right? There's a lot of just this ego and pride, frankly, that fuels that. And I think our abilities to check our egos at the door in leadership roles is one of the things we struggle with, but one of the things that's just absolutely critical in order to be a good leader. And to say, hey, not everybody is good at everything, and I'm not good at everything. Clearly, there's a lot of stuff I could never do, and I wouldn't last a day at it. And so it's okay that's okay. Let's find people that can do that. And I think it's just a long cultural thing of, we having to play these super, hero roles in our culture that we need to continually whittle away at.
Mm-hmm. And Ross, as you were talking, I was also thinking about, I know one of the projects that we worked on was a hiring project. And like, when you look at people's strengths, I'm not going to speak for you, but I think we kind of agree on this, that it's also really important when you go to hire people to look at the strengths of the people on your team and what it is that you're missing, to make sure that when you're looking for someone, obviously they need to be able to do the job, but if they also have this other strength that you're in need of within your team, then that's an extra bonus.
I think that's so true. We tend to be very myopic when we're looking at hiring and filling job positions, because we don't necessarily look at strengths. We often look at experiences. And so we say we need a certain experience. We need somebody that has done this kind of job like this before. And we forget I think the more important thing is the strengths. And so strength composition of a team is incredibly important. So looking across your team and say, what strengths do you have in the team? What strengths do we need to be successful as an organization? And really studying that composition and figuring out, how can I augment my composition? Particularly comes important in leadership roles. I've been doing a fair amount of work now with boards in both the nonprofit and for-profit sector, and looking at board composition. And it's that's an area that honestly is in need of a lot of work. Is a lot of boards don't have the right composition. They don't have the right strengths across the board to be an effective board. And that, that's an area of, I guess, higher level leadership than sometimes everybody's used to dealing with. But it's incredible how much improvement there's possible in boards these days.
So Ross, I know you're talking nonprofit there, but I know you had mentioned before we got on the call that you had an example of maybe someone that the strengths didn't fit with the organization at the time, and kind of what happened. Would you mind sharing one of those stories with us?
Sure. One that comes to mind is in a number of my leadership roles over the years, I've had frankly been blessed with having the opportunity to have an assistant, an executive assistant. And I looked at my executive assistants as somebody that together, it was like a 1 + 1 = 3 thing. Like, how can we be such closely aligned that together we're more than either one of us could ever be? And so my relationships with my assistants over the years has been very, very tight and very synergistic, I guess. And so anyway, a number of years ago, I had an assistant, and things just weren't working out. Her heart wasn't in the particular role, it seemed like, and it was showing up in her work. And so we had a number of discussions about that. And finally, it was just getting to the point where it just wasn't working. And I'd asked her to leave the company. And so that was a really hard time. It was a hard time for me. Again, if you imagine being so closely integrated with a person that, they know a lot about who you are and what your weaknesses and strengths are, as well as theirs. And so it was difficult to go through that process. It turns out after a while, things settled down, and I tried to stay somewhat in contact with her and be as supportive as I could. And she wrote me a long letter, a handwritten letter. It was a while afterwards, and it was 2 or 3 pages long. And she shared a lot of her past, which frankly had some real bad things happened to her as a teenager and stuff, but she just never had anybody be very honest with her in leadership. And she thanked me for being honest with her, and she goes, it was the first time that anybody ever said to me, you know, this isn't working out for you. You need to find your passion. You need to find your strengths, because you have all these great strengths, but you're not leaning into them. And turns out what she always wanted to do was do mission work. And she wrote that letter to me from, I can't remember, some Eastern Bloc country where she was doing mission work for the church. And she was happier than she'd ever been. And she just said to me, you know, this would have never happened. I mean, this kind of sounds funny. It would have never happened if I didn't fire her, you know, but, you know, but that was the reality of the situation. And for somebody to open up to me about, I mean, the personal stuff she opened up to me about that I never knew for all the years she worked for me. And then to kind of tie that all into how it was life transforming for her. I mean, it was like, wow. So that hard work that this lady and I did together, I mean, it was hard work to go through what we did, but then to see it turn out like it did, it gave me courage to be more, courageous with people in the future, and to have hard discussions when you need to have hard discussions. I have since that I was fairly young in my senior leadership role at that point. Since then, I've had a number of courageous discussions, not all of them, of course, leading to somebody, you know, leaving the company. A lot of them just to help people with their skills, or maybe their interpersonal skills or whatever. And the number of those that have come back where people said, Ross, I have been in the workforce for 20 years or 30 years or whatever, and nobody has ever had the courage to tell me that. I wish somebody would have told me that. I can't believe I've been doing that, whatever thing, for all these years that maybe was offending people, and I just never realized it. Mm-hmm. And so I think as leaders, we need to be, you know, we just need to have more courage.
Yeah. Well, and when you talk about courage too, how does faith play into situations like what you just explained?
Well, for me, how it fits in is, you know, I look at all these situations, and to use a cliche thing that was on a bunch of wristbands a number of years ago, you know, the "what would Jesus do" thing, you know, I will say that's one of the things that plays through my head in those discussions, in those situations, dealing with people, or frankly, just dealing with the business or the organization as a whole. But when you're dealing with people, you know, what would Jesus do? And I think sometimes we take that as everything's got to be all nicey nice or whatever. And that's not true. I mean, look at the number of times in the Bible that Christ rebuked Peter and said, you know what, you're not doing the right thing here, dude. You know, you gotta change. And he was very honest in that situation. Very honest, brutally honest, we would say. But it was, as long as it's right and it's correct and it's done in love, I think we have to. I think, you know, think about the contrast between being honest with somebody in love and lying to somebody.
Which creates fear.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think people are like, oh, I'm afraid that won't be tactful, or, you know, I won't be liked, or, you know, whatever. But it's like, well, the converse of that is typically you're telling little white lies to people. And, you know, I know we do it with the best of intentions, but it's not the right thing to do if you're a leader.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. This has been a fantastic conversation today. And so I want to thank you for being here with us. And I also want to ask Debbie, if someone's listening in today and they wanted to know a little bit more about the work that you do, where would be a good place for them to find you?
Perfect. Well, and if you want to talk to Ross a little bit more about vision or hire him, feel free to reach out to me too, and I can connect you. But I would suggest going out to my website at www.3, it's all spelled out, THREE, V as in Victor, consulting.com. And also feel free to follow us on Instagram or Facebook, and also on YouTube and iTunes.
Fantastic. Well, for this episode of Faith-Infused Leadership, I'm your co-host, Meredith Banka, here with Debbie Heiser and our guest, Ross Longinhi. Thank you all for being here, and we'll see you again the next time.
Bye.